Well, there's a lot to come this morning. Shortly, we'll hear from the Shadow Environment Secretary, Victoria Atkins. Plus, as revised stats show, more than 1 million visas have been granted the past year alone. Is it even possible to tame immigration? We'll speak to the chair of the Independent Migration Advisory Committee, Professor Brian Bell. Well, let's get the view from the opposition. Joining me now is the Conservatives' Shadow Environment Secretary, Victoria Atkins. Good morning.
Good morning.
We've been talking about migration. I'm a bit puzzled about where you guys are. Are you apologising for the record high net immigration figure? Your leader says, truthfully, we got it wrong. Or are you, like the former Home Secretary James, cleverly high-fiving yourselves for bringing numbers down a bit after 14 years?
Well, look, I think we have acknowledged, as Kemi, in fairness, did on her speech this week, that the numbers have been too high. There are a number of reasons for that, including, of course, we had the enormous humanitarian response to conflicts in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, and the worries about human rights coercion in Hong Kong. But with those reasons to one side, we also want to look at the fundamentals. And so the measures that James, as you've correctly alluded to, was talking about the measures that we have made in the last year or so to bring down immigration. We're seeing it now.
So the message is still a bit mixed, isn't it? It's kind of, sorry, but actually we're really great at dealing with this.
I don't think, look, we took an enormous, defeat in July. We have heard voters loud and clear on this. They do care deeply about immigration.
So that is a sorry.
And so do we, yeah. And look, we also know that some of the measures that we have put in place they are already bearing fruit, as we've seen. The removal, for example, of the ability of international students to bring dependents. That is the main reason why immigration has gone down in these latest figures. We also know, however, that voters want to see some certainty about this, which is why Kemi was talking about the cap on numbers. And I note Labour have left any firm plans for that out of their talk this weekend about planning for change.
Your remark about this bearing fruit invites a really cheesy pun, but you were talking to the farmers this week, and you're right. You said the leader of the opposition said you would bring in a cap on the number, including for seasonal workers. When you were out marching with the farmers, did you mention that you want to cut off their supply of fruit pickers and farmhands if you got back into power?
No, what we were talking about was the incredibly dangerous impact that this family farms tax is going to have on family farms and indeed the very fruit farms that you're referencing, Trevor.
I got that, but I'm asking you. But I'm asking about the
facing farms.
Kemi Badenoch didn't mention in her speech on the platform, by the way, farmers, I'm going to bring in a cap that means that you won't be able to bring in as many seasonal workers as you want. Well, or am I wrong?
I'm going to a farm in Kent on Monday, so I will talk about this. But the number one issue the number one issue they are facing at the moment is the family farm tax.
No. Come on, I'm asking about the number.
Trevor,
that is not the number one issue, actually, they're facing at the moment. The number one issue is whether the fruit rot in the fields. Are you going to put a cap on their numbers?
You're quite right. Actually, it's the national insurance hike that is going to cause already cash poor farms to struggle to employ people. So this budget was a nightmare for family farms and the farming industry, which is why on Wednesday we are forcing the government to the dispatch box to explain this measure, but also to force Labour MPs to decide whether they're going to back their farmers or suck up to Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. And we want them to join us in axing this family farm tax.
If I may say so, this is a spectacular and valiant attempt to avoid us answering the question which I asked you. Will the cap that you propose reduce the numbers of seasonal workers available to farmers?
The very fact that Kemi talked about this week shows that we want to have a conversation about this. She has set out the measures that, well, Trevor, be fair, I'm
having a conversation with you now, and I'm simply asking you, will it reduce the number of seasonal workers or not?
So we will formulate this policy, the details of this policy, over the coming months, as in fairness Kemi has said she wants to do, to set out our principles and our values and then set out the way in which those policies will be operationalised. But what is noticeable is that with all of this, the budget shows how little this government cares about or understands the countryside, because they would not have done what they have done with these various taxes. It's not just the family farm tax, it's the tax on fertiliser, the many, many other things that they're doing.
All right, well, let's declare a truce on this, that you're still working it out, right? On policy, you're saying it's too early, it's reasonable, but you've been clear that you'd reverse the VAT on independent school fees. You've been clear that you'd reinstitute the winter fuel allowance. Why, by the way, are you not tackling the national insurance rise that came in with the budget? Because you'll have to vote on it this week. Are you going to vote? You're going to vote against it, I take it.
We will be voting against the legislation for that measure. In terms of the overall budget, I mean, in the round, this was a budget of tax rises. It was a budget that the Chancellor herself admitted at the dispatch box will see lower growth and higher inflation. That was quite some claim by her at the dispatch box. And so what we want to see across the round are these tax hikes that we know will damage businesses, whether they are farm businesses or family businesses or other businesses around the economy. We are deeply, deeply concerned about this. And I think also, you know, over this winter, we've had a bit of cold weather this winter already. We will begin to see the impacts of their winter fuel payments decision sadly come to fruition, with older people, pensioners being, I'm afraid to say, wheeled into A&E with hypothermia. These are decisions that Labour MPs and the Chancellor are going to have to justify week in, week out. And so across the budget, we are deeply concerned about many of these measures.
It's very interesting. I mean, if you add up the things that you have said, you're opposing tax rises, traditional Tory. You are riding to defence of private school parents, the landed gentry, and of course, old people. Is this a return to, if you like, a Toryism of the past?
Trevor, if I may correct you on the middle example you gave there, the farmers in my constituency, and I'm very proud Lincolnshire MP, my constituency helps feed the country. They may be asset rich, but many of them are cash poor. And indeed, I've been deluged with examples of farmers who may have millions of pounds of farmland on paper, and yet their annual income is £20,000.
No, I understand they're small farmers
so
here, but
we mustn't, please.
But in the round,
we mustn't mischaracterise them.
In the round, looking at the set of interests, there's nothing wrong with it, but they're looking at the set of interests that you are foregrounding and you're defending. It seems an interesting turn for the Conservatives. Well, is this a return to the Tory party of the past?
We have never agreed that education should be taxed, and we know that that will be having a huge impact on families, not all of whom are, wealthy people. People make choices. They want to send their children to a school. It may be because the school specialises in, for example, special educational needs and so on. It's about helping people make those choices for themselves without raising taxes in the way that this socialist government is doing.
Just very, very quickly, you're not worried about the fact that Mr Farage declared this week he's got 100,000 members, some of which used to be your members?
Look, I think we've had a very, very busy week. My goodness me, if you look at the headlines, including, of course, the very important debate on Friday, I have to say I think that's not probably one of the headlines that most people have cared about this week.
Victoria Atkins, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.